Hello and most welcome to 1797. Oh my God, we are approaching the 800 of the Heidegger series. Soon we'll have 1,800 episodes. Must be some sort of record when it comes to philosophy on the net. I don't know.
Hooray.
Comment, sorry?
Hooray, hooray, hooray.
Yeah. Hooray for you too and for our listeners. But we will continue a short one, since it's kind of late here, where we ended with aspect perception in 1794, aspect perception and understanding the meaning of words in Wittgenstein's philosophical investigations. And that could very well be the author. Seemed to be a jolly chap. Maybe we should drop him an email. Well, I'll do that. And last time we talked about this, one of the most difficult things to get, and that is about aspect seeing. And I think it could be a safe bet to say that complementarity, wave and particle, is a sort of aspect seeing. So there is an interesting parallelism going on here between Wittgenstein and quantum mechanics. Although to my knowledge, he has in written text mentioned nothing of it. And few authors have been looking into the connection or a possible connection. But I think it's my guess here, my bet would be on aspect seeing is so easy to get wrong. Being too specific will put you in the wrong seat. Being too vague will do the same thing. So careful reading of Wittgenstein, and I would say a bit of slowness of understanding is preferable. And we continue where we left off, ending with the word else. In my printout, it was page 7, it could be page 8. While aspect perception generally does not require interpretation, as in the case of the duck rabbit, in some cases it is required of us in order to see the aspect change. The interpretive imagination required for seeing the triangle as something that has fallen over is the same type of imagination that is required for us to understand, if only vaguely, what Wittgenstein means when he says Tuesday is lean. We can see that in the case of idiosyncratic uses of words, aspect perception clarifies two things. First, an idiosyncratic use of a word is a secondary use, which requires an antecedent familiarity with a primary use. Second, understanding the way in which an idiosyncratic use of a word is employed requires interpretation. Second, the construction of metaphor operates in a similar way to idiosyncratic use of words. That is, we in already understanding the primary meaning of the word, employ it in a different way. In this regard, we see the meaning as such and such in the specific case. To use an example, if we hear someone say, we must stand shoulder to shoulder to overcome current hardships, then we see the meaning of the phrase as something like, we must work together, or we must promote solidarity. Here, as in the case of idiosyncratic uses of words, we need both to understand the primary meaning before understanding the secondary one. And an element of interpretation is required for us to understand. It is certainly not the case in either metaphor or idiosyncratic uses of words that everyone will be able to understand the secondary meaning. As there are different levels of familiarity with language and varying levels of ability for interpretation, there may be many instances of metaphorical or idiosyncratic uses of a word whose meaning escapes many people. So aspect perception elucidates issues concerning understanding idiosyncratic uses of words and the construction of metaphor. It does this by both. One, demonstrating that we have both primary and secondary senses of words, and that we need to understand, that is, achieve a certain level of familiarity with the primary sense before we can employ a word in a secondary sense. And two, shows that understanding the meaning of a word, especially in the case of secondary senses, sometimes requires interpretation. This, however, is not uncontroversial. I will now address two possible objections to Wittgenstein's view. Four. Objections, replies. First, can Wittgenstein's view of idiosyncratic uses of language not be taken as a kind of private language? That is, if the secondary idiosyncratic use of the word is so distant from the standard use, then can we ever be sure of its meaning in the context? If this were the case, then Wittgenstein's discussion of aspect perception as a tool for elucidating the way in which we understand idiosyncratic uses of words would be in direct contradiction to his view that there cannot be a private language. However, it is not the case that idiosyncratic uses of words depend on a private language. If we take the example of Tuesday is lean, Wednesday is fat, then we can see that the meaning is not hidden from us in the way that it would be in a private language. That is, none of the meanings of the words depend on Wittgenstein's private sensations. He says, asked, what do you really mean here by fat and lean? I could only explain the meanings in the usual way. We might not understand why Wittgenstein is inclined to describe Tuesday as lean and Wednesday as fat. But that does not stop us from understanding the meaning of the words themselves. This ability to understand the words is sufficient for our being able to say that idiosyncratic uses of words do not depend on a private language. Second, and more pressingly, it seems as though Wittgenstein's view that we only understand the meaning of a word through consistent, correct application does not account fully for our understanding of metaphor. Even with the additional explanation given by the discussion of aspect perception. That is, if understanding the meaning of a word depends on being able to consistently use it according to the rule that is governed by it. And in metaphorical use of language, we employ a secondary meaning of a word, which requires that we both understand the primary meaning and interpret correctly in the context. Then, how can we be said to understand metaphorical uses of words at all? To strengthen this objection to Wittgenstein's view, I will employ a distinction made by George Orwell in his essay, Politics and the English Language. Orwell outlines 3 different types of metaphor, only 2 of which are important here. The first is a newly invented metaphor, which assists thought by evoking a visual image. The second is a technically dead metaphor, which has in effect reverted to being an ordinary word and can be employed as such. The second type of metaphor is uncontroversial here. If a metaphor is so familiar that we treat it as an ordinary word, then our understanding that metaphor will occur in the usual way, that is, through use. The first type of metaphor, however, is more difficult. If we, as Orwell suggests, should never use a metaphor which we are used to seeing in print, then how can we, on Wittgenstein's model, understand any metaphor of the first type? The problem here is not that we can never understand secondary uses of words. It is rather that it seems difficult to account for understanding completely novel secondary uses. This problem, however, can be solved by analogy to seeing the possible secondary aspects of an image. If we turn again to the triangle and try to see it as something that has fallen over, then I believe we can understand how aspect perception does in fact explain our understanding of metaphorical senses of words. And I think there we need to end for some very short discussion. 1797. I will not take any quotes this time. I will just briefly, on a general basis, cover the area aspect perception. As I said initially here, aspect perception has a parallel to quantum mechanical two aspects reality or contradictory realities. What do I mean by that? Well, take the rabbit duck or the duck rabbit. Once you have the duck, you no longer have the rabbit. Once you have the rabbit, you no longer have the duck. It is gone. It simply is no longer there. The superposition has collapsed. I see possibility in this text, which I won't go into now, that I will leave to 1798, but that could actually go over into what the author refers to as secondary meaning, secondary metaphor. And that would be very close to the A and B problem in quantum mechanics, where there are two isolated persons called Alice and Bob are sitting in separate rooms, and Alice usually is the one that is rolling dice and communicating that to a secondary source. That is Bob. Where the collapse is transferred to Bob with interesting, completely counterintuitive results. One could say that quantum mechanics strikes at logic, and the problems so far in this lecture series, we haven't found yet an easy way to explain this without having to refer to these experiments. I think Wittgenstein's aspect seeing is actually a very good explanation. Less mechanical and less difficult way of going into this side. But do remember, in physics, there are no bigger contradictions whatsoever, not even emptiness and existence is such a big difference as particle and wave. So give up the idea that non-existence is the biggest contradiction. The biggest one is actually between wave and particle. And that could be very helpful for those ones in the previous lecture, 1796, who didn't get the very counterintuitive idea that, for instance, good and evil covers all of goodness, and that's a pure goodness. In the same way, you will have a complete reality only if you take the both contradictions, but you will never ever have one contradiction plus the other. You will have much more. Kalle, please, a short comment from you, sir.
Thank you, Hans. I will anticipate the triangle, since we had already triangle in the previous lecture. Let me see. Here, no, it doesn't work. My here. We had triangle. We had it in the previous. So yeah, the triangle is something that has fallen over. It's a kind of metaphor. How can a triangle be something that has fallen over? And this reminds me vaguely about the British female comedian who asked people about the pyramids. Hans, you mentioned her.
Yeah, I can do that. Oh yeah. What's her name now?
She asked a physician or archaeologist, why can we be sure that the Egyptians didn't start making their pyramids from the top down?
Top down, yes. That was, I would say, an incredibly good example of aspect perception. And in a way, she has a point there. You can actually see the pyramids as constructed from the top to the bottom. It's very good, yeah. What's her name? It was hilarious, but I think there in this hilarious and diversion and fun, there is actually a point there. It is hard to tell, especially since time is as it is. Maybe the pyramids were actually started from the top going to the bottom. By the way, I also saw that you had Julian Barber there, the end of time.
Yes, indeed. So the reason why I wanted to take it up is that he discusses a triangle, if I remember correctly. It has a very important point. And perhaps late now, he has this triangle land, everything that. Perhaps we can very quickly, let me see, take up the important part. Julian Barber, The End of Time is the name of the book. Let me see if we can get a great picture here. So this word occurs 270 times in the book. So perhaps, and I think he comes, and let me see a great image. So according to Julian Barber, the nature of time is like a triangle. If I understand correctly.
Yeah, time and space in the take of Julian Barber are triangles, and
I think this would work. Actually, it's not a literal triangle, but it's very close. Don't agree. Let me see. The image is not very clear. So this is a triangle, and it's like an inverted pyramid.
Oh yeah, once more you have that one there.
Its frontiers formed by special triangles as explained in figure 4. Platonius. And so this is a word invented by Julian Barber to invent the real nature of space. And
yes, like space and time. You can actually say, and you have an excellent point here. Thank you very much, Kalle. There is actually aspect perception in between the triangles. It is marvelous. I did not think of that. And there is an odd coincidence. I was today asked to describe triangles. I kid you not. No one has ever asked me to describe the triangle, but I was asked today to describe two triangles, one inverted and one the normal way, pointing to each other. It was an odd coincidence, but Julian Barber is working with aspect perception. So he goes to a more fundamental time that is makes more quantum mechanical sense. And that space and time is amazingly close to the Wittgensteinian take. It is aspect perception. Very good, Kalle.
Thank you.
I will take up this more in the next, I'm afraid we're, with your permission.
I know. I could have
end here. That was incredible, Kalle. I hope I can go to sleep after this. But what an odd thing. Someone asked me to explain what is a triangle.
And I think Wittgenstein, in his bizarre way, was a comedian too, since it is an odd way to say a triangle that has fallen over. It's something that a comedian could say, a triangle, imagine a triangle falling over. So let's end there with
with a fallen triangle.
Image.
Yeah, let's hope no triangles fall over tonight. Thank you very much, Kalle Lundahl. Thank you everyone for listening in. Have a very excellent morning, day, afternoon or night. Bye-bye.